are going to have a dialogue with 3 experts in this conjuncture we are going through at the global level. It's not just Colombia, Latin America, it's global. And we want to have this message. It's not that financing or international cooperation is leaving, it's fund reduction. And we need to analyze that. So what is the context? What are the scenarios? And what are the strategies? And we want to start identifying, strengthening each one of the actions we conduct. So no further at this moment, we are going to pass on the floor to our experts so that they tell us a little bit about themselves, who they work for, the organizations. And Nicolás, you have the floor. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. It is a pleasure to see very many familiar faces and also new people. I work with CRS, Capital Relief Services. This is Cáritas in US. We are rebels because we don't include the Cáritas name in the US, and I coordinate humanitarian response in South America, a region where we only work for localization. We don't have physical presence. We don't have an office. We just support capacity strengthening, local, national stakeholders. So it is a pleasure and ready for the panel. Good morning. Oh, good afternoon. Laura Cadavid from the International Cooperation Agency. I've been at the agency as a public servant for 7 years, and I coordinate the multilateral team. Thank you for inviting me. Good afternoon. I'm Ronal Rodríguez. I am a researcher at Rosario University. We've been working on these topics for 20 years. Topics related to Venezuela, and for 10 years the impact of migration flow that comes from Venezuela in the framework of humanitarian emergency. That's the work, that's the experience I'm going to talk to you all about. Thank you so much. As you can see, we have 3 experts from 3 different sectors, and we are going to address questions now. What are the scenarios and main challenges Latin American countries face when looking at international cooperation fund reduction? Nicolás. Thank you, Lorena. The first point that we need to highlight, and Liliana mentioned it, and she was here in the previous session, is that when we talk about localization leadership, we cannot go into debate only in financing. We are talking about leading answers, leading coordination, and funds are a means to do that. So the panel will speak about funding cuts. Well, it's very important. As civil society, we need to focus on local leadership, because right now, with all the cuts, there is the temptation to reduce efforts towards localization and cutting their funding. A little bit of context. We are in Latin America, the Caribbean, in a region that is not such a big priority for international cooperation. Now, with cuts, we see that they are prioritizing other types of answers, other regions in the world. In these years with migration, lots of funds have come, but regionally, I mean, it's not a priority as a region. Something we're concerned about in this context is that the approach is being reduced. For example, let's say saving lives like they did in the United States. No, they're talking about resilience, risk reduction, climate change that are key. So this is one first part when we talk about context. Now, the impact and the challenges with these cuts, we need to see the impact of national organizations and in general the civil society. The impact we're analyzing that is disproportionate. International agencies have this financial muscle to face this crisis, not to overcome them, but for many stakeholders, there is the risk and operational sustainability. Yesterday we were talking, and you mentioned mental health. Not to know what's going to happen from here to 1 month, to December. For many organizations, there is existential crisis. And in the localizations, this is a huge risk because efforts of many years are at risk because of this trend that we see. And I'm going to speak up about more the United States because it's the Humanitarian Catholic Agency. Right now, there aren't counterparts who to speak in government about localization, who to speak with. So those few funds that will be allocated to humanitarian response, those that are there, that will be there, they won't be able to be channeled to local actors right now because human capacity needed, human resources for localization is not there anymore. That is a fact right now. Not only challenges, but Lorena, this question is about challenges. In communities that we all serve, there are many crises, many emergencies that are not visible. Colombia and all countries in the region, there are floodings in Brazil, in fires, Paraguay, Peru. They don't come to the media. But with the cooperation, there used to be funds, quick response funds, and right now they're not there. So there are a lot of crises that are not being assisted. There is this big concern. Another big concern is that we are not having the same level. I mean, there were different levels to gather data, diagnosis, to make crisis visible. Right now, they're not there. So without evidence, it would be more difficult to advocate to find funds. Lack of evidence, I said. To end, I'd like to speak about localization, local leadership. It is important to recognize that localization it's in this fragile state. I mean, in spite of the fact that there are many initiatives, the Global Compact, and this was not the big priority for many donors. Right now, when we speak about local leadership, there are so many training processes, visibility, advocacy that are not financed anymore. So now that we're going to talk about opportunities, we need to focus on how we place local leadership in the agenda, not only from the financing perspective. In the USAID case and other US agencies, there used to be solid localization processes with ambitious goals. There were efforts in the work that we do in the region. Our partners, local partners, could access to more than $55 million directly without intermediaries. In many cases, that has been suspended. Many of the people in government that used to lead those processes are not there anymore. This is a reality that we need to look into when we talk about localization. Thank you, Nicolás. Laura? The question is challenging because talking about challenges in Latin America, particularly challenges in Colombia, is a question that comprises several aspects. First, the table has USAID funds being reduced. It's something that is not complete in Britain. US funds through USAID, we know every day is changing, it's unstable. We are expecting for decisions to come up. There are organizations that have received the letters to close project. Other projects continue, and even so, this environment is very unstable. But saying that, first of all, this landscape is not new. Cooperation goes up and down. There are times when there are peaks, like resource allocation, for example, when we had the pandemic. For Colombia, during and post-pandemic is some of the time when cooperation flows peaked, and at the global level there were many technical financial efforts to strengthen international cooperation. So we have had moments in 2023, 2024, the war in Ukraine and corporations goes up and down. However, in Colombia, we knew that there was this trend not only at the global level but in our country to reduce funds, cooperation funds. So we knew that that process was coming. With when Colombia went into the OECD as a receiving for countries official assistance to development, that was a landscape, but this is a landscape that is not part of apocalypse. Chile, Mexico, they have gone through this graduation process and did not receive cooperation funds. We saw that as a future in the midterm, but starting in 20 well, in January 24th this year, it was a surprise. We see that this is a global process. It's not only affecting Colombia and Latin America, but it is also affecting cooperation actions at the international level, multilateralism, how UN agencies that come up from a process, from this shared vision of rights, the minimum thing that must be defended from countries at the global level, well, all this as a change that's still there on the table at the international level. Resource reduction in Colombia does not only limit to the US, it is broader. We have received announcements from many other countries. Even before this year, we knew cooperation resources were going to be reduced. However, in the case of the US, Colombia is the country that receives the most resources in the region, Latin America and the Caribbean, so the impact is very strong. And if you've seen our bulletins, 50% of resources received from the country at the level of international cooperation are being cut. Millions, thousands of millions of dollars. For the analysis that we were talking about, we were talking about 2 billion US dollars. So those projects that are seek to help migrants, peace and security, productive chains, all of those were affected. This is at the topic level, but then the specific one is not just in terms of resources, but the gender approach, diversity. So it also goes from a political agenda, it starts moving, but it also brings some actions, humanitarian actions, different institutions. We've spoken about this, but they don't have gender, feminism, inclusion, diversity. So there is this need that's there on the table, and we cannot just cover it, like from getting resources, manage corporation resources. So I think another challenge is related seriously to how the national government, social organizations at the national government, and how the cooperation system we're going to react. There is this main concern on humanitarian action. Colombia, for a long time, had worked on the triple nexus with the leadership of the United Nations, implementing agencies, and how humanitarian action comes not just with serving emergencies, but also with long-lasting solutions, that special articulation with peace, conflict. However, this cost reduction, is taking us so we can see that many humanitarian action scenarios are not prioritized anymore. They're not protected anymore, not covered anymore. Many agencies have reported reprioritization to save lives immediately in those territories where they have staff. So this is time when we are going to be at the national level reconfiguring, not just from organizations, but also from the state. In the next questions, we will be able to address and identify, okay, what strategies, what mechanisms will be activated. They need to be activated to be able to respond to this challenge that calls us as a country to see not only what's going to happen with international cooperation, but with humanitarian action specifically.
Thank you, Laura. Okay, I'm going to approach from a different angle of human mobility in the Venezuelan border. It's been 10 years, a decade since the crisis started when the Colombian government had to approach it. They did in a context where it wasn't ready for it and we didn't expect it. So the first months, even the first years, the response from the state, the civil society was very interesting because there weren't resources for migration. Other organizations that dealt with displacement and particularly the CSO in migration routes were the first to respond, and they responded many times and specific phenomena such as volunteers. In the case of the dining hall, the Divine Providence, more than 300 people got ready to make some food for Venezuelans that were coming, looking for it in the Colombian side, on the Colombian side. It was an interesting response at the moment. We must also say that we should remember this started on August 19th when the Venezuelan government kicked out some Colombians that lived on the Venezuelan side. They were very aggressive, calling them criminals and turning their house. It's down that response of the Colombian society was to support that population quickly. We never thought, and the government was wondering if they would expel Colombians in Venezuela. We never thought that Venezuela would turn into one of the main, let's say, government that would, let's say, send people out. Then that's something we began to build. There were moments when coordination between the Colombian state, even amongst governments, moving from one government to another, we would bring continuity to some of the projects, but especially the CSO. They were the first organizations to take action. What difficulties we face today? We were able to build its course with regional commitments. Chile, Ecuador, Peru, they supported donors, they brought resources, and the region was able to develop other things thanks to the resources we would get from migration. So in the area of education, resources that came to serve children and adolescents in Venezuela who began to come to Colombian institutions in September 2018. Regardless of the policy, these children and adolescents will be able to join the educational system, but these passed on to Colombians that were vulnerable, and they could take advantage of these opportunities, use those resources and strategies. Today, the scenario is not very promising. We're talking about the end of the resources come from the U.S., but then in the coming years, the resources from Europe are going to shorten. All the, uh, let's say, consequence of the war in Ukraine is going to have to be covered by the Europeans. And it means that countries such as Colombia, Peru, Ecuador, Venezuela itself, that reserve resources for migration, there'll be cuts. It's been seen in previous years, and we're going to see that more of that in the coming years. So, and we should say that yes, we did have the support. Now we also need to take the blame partly and say when we had the support, we did not increase the institutional capabilities. Many of the offices that looked into migration, the staff depended only on the international cooperation resources. Even the border management only had one public servant, and then all of them were service provision employees paid by international cooperation. That was repeated in the main cities. That was a period for local governments and city governments, governor's office to build the institutional infrastructure, but we didn't. And then find resources for migration, but again, we didn't do it. Today, the national government sees this, and we don't have someone would have an authority to look into migration. The director of Migration Colombia who quit, deputy director, it's been over 6 months without someone to coordinate this. The Minister of Equality, there are vacancies for 3 or 4 years. The person who was looking to migration at the Chancellor's office, those in charge of migration were sent on missions, so those that are working on it and to provide a response, they're gone. And it's not enough. And one more thing, one of the things we lost in the last few years was the capability to focus on the needs of migrants. So we are at a very complex moment in time. Now, that doesn't mean that we cannot reinvent a response. One of the features of Venezuelan migration is the agency of Venezuelans themselves, the Venezuelan community. They can have a political impact. They can open doors or spaces. They've brought resources to help their Venezuelan brothers and sisters. And we need to see how to redirect these efforts to the diaspora. Diaspora, there's 8 million today. They'll help the vulnerable Venezuelan population. Within the same Venezuelan diaspora, there's a chance to create tools to build the Venezuela that is in the diaspora. And finally, I'll talk about that we need to rethink of the philanthropy in countries such as Latin America and especially Colombia. When you look at the foundations, I mean the private sector, many of them what they did, they administer cooperation resources more than donating their money. Many of them they executed cooperation resources, big foundations, organizations that have capabilities, but in the end, they are just managing their resources. And I think we need to start rethinking on how to become more solidarious. In the case of migrants coming to Colombia, it's just on a case or an example when Colombian society was solidarious and we avoided one of the biggest phenomena of human mobility, did not create a crisis in Colombia. If you notice, any other European country, let's say 2.8 million people came, it could have gone into a crisis, not just social, but political crisis. But in the Colombian case, that didn't happen. And it happened because most Colombians made an effort to receive the Venezuelan population. That today we need to continue with that process to build together. And Nicolás said it at the beginning. One of the things that we're losing is these capabilities. Part of the discourse of the administration of the U.S. is that they were feeding bureaucratic machinery, but many of those machineries, of that machinery, were people going back to their regions. They worked on international cooperation. They turned into human capital, and that allowed for the governance of their territories. And that quote-unquote bureaucracy that was stigmatized many times in many developing territories because many professionals, had they stayed there or had they left the country, they actually came back to their territories and began to build with the help of international cooperation. That's human capital. But the risk is that we lose that human capital. They leave again or they look for other destinations. When in the case of migration, we had built some very interesting learning curves. Thank you. What can we highlight? Even though there's a reduction of international financing, we need to strengthen local leadership. The response from CSO, strengthen our capabilities. This is not a new thing that there are fewer resources. That's always happening, especially in Latin America and the Caribbean. Latin America and the Caribbean. We are a receiving country and we see different situations. So the invitation is to look for solidarity and cooperation strategies to innovate and continue to respond to everything that's coming along the way. Okay, we're gonna start with the next question. Strategies and opportunities. How can we do this? So, Ronald, if you agree, we can start with Ronald. Strategies is a complex thing. More than new strategies, I can talk about the Colombian state strategy to approach migration and how well it turned out. I mean, the Colombian response in a world where migration is stigmatized and doors are closed, they're criminalized actually. Citizens that do not have any kind of crime, they're accused of being part of criminal organizations and terrorists. That's the term that was given. The Colombian response is interesting because 2016 was a complex year. It was a year when in the U.S., Donald Trump was coming to office the first time. The right-wing parties were growing in Europe, and Colombia began with a response that started from the humanitarian side. Humanitarian assistance to a population that was outside the borders of the capabilities of the state, and they had not even been designed to receive foreigners. Colombia had some instruments to look at the internal displacement because of the armed conflict, but many public officers, secretaries of education, mayors did not know how to respond to migrants from Venezuela, because if they gave resources to these foreigners, later they thought they might be in trouble because the resources were not designed or planned for it. And the response was from the civilians. So that first level of response from CSO, that's interesting because most people do not see clearly that it was just the exercise of citizens. Many of them are victims of the armed conflict that became organized, people who opened dining rooms in their backyards. And little by little, they started to receive the support from international cooperation. The case of Divina Providencia dining room, people do not remember. It was just a pot, community pot, that we started when Colombians were kicked out of Venezuela. Also, the church began to organize this because a group of citizens that had nothing to eat, and they produced some standards. Sometimes there were crashes, yes, especially because the Colombian community felt that the Venezuelan community was using the resources that they thought had to be for them. They were vulnerable population too. I think a father called Francesco in Cucuta once. He was stoned in one of the dining rooms that he had there in Cucuta. And little by little, this was built. It was a dialogue between the arriving community and the vulnerable community. That first dialogue, that first approach and brotherhood between citizens with needs and, of course, the willingness of Colombians that shows solidarity because they had been forced to flee as well. I guess also authorities came a little bit later to look for resources. It's something that started in the second semester of 2018. Then the chancellor, then Carlos Holmes Trujillo. If you look at the record book by the chancellor's office, there wasn't a week in Colombia. He was not in a week because he went to look for resources. So the question is, if the resources are not there anymore, where can we go? Where can we turn? What can help us? Situations in the Colombian territory that have worsened. The armed conflict, unfortunately, especially in Cucuta, which is the Colombian raider, we call this, it's an alert to what's happening. In Cucuta, Cucuta is facing one of the peaks that we hadn't seen in 10 years. But this time it's Colombian population that must come to the city areas. Migration has not stopped. On the contrary, the response and the lack of coordination has been negative. Chile is tightening migration policy. Peru has a very xenophobic discourse. Ecuador has a difficult situation as well. Colombia continues to be and will always be the brother country of Venezuela with the biggest exporter and Venezuelan population that planned to come before or that was thinking of going to the US. They're thinking of new destinations. Most of them want to get to Spain, but the Atlantic doesn't allow them, so many of them are stuck. Yeah, they get stuck in Colombian territory at a moment when we cannot regulate this population. Those have come to our land without a passport, or they're here irregularly. So we need to rethink how we're going to do this. It's one of the questions that's going to come up because Colombian society went over a humanitarian response to regularization. That was a process with the, a, let's say, by laws or the policy with the temporary status of migrants. But let's keep in mind that Venezuelans will be able to participate in politics, those who are regular and even those who are not regular yet, I mean legally in the country. So population, their claims, they are using Venezuelan population to go to the political meetings, political marches, and so on. We need to rethink a strategy. We must listen to different stakeholders, but I always highlight the Colombian response. It's interesting. When you look at what happened in Germany, what's happening in the US, migration has turned into a crime, criminalization, but we haven't gotten there yet. And we're in time to build at CSO new responses so that that won't happen. As long as that doesn't happen, regardless of the resources, we're going to be able to produce integration. It's always less costly to integrating than non-integrated. If we wanted to do the math, how much it would cost not to integrate children and adolescents into the educational system that they couldn't study, it was not a social expense, it was a social investment. Social investment that we need to keep up so that it we can yield benefits after supporting this population, and whether we like it or not, they'll be Colombian citizens. It's the part of a relation between the two states and with private companies, but it's part of the Colombian government. Okay, during this time when we have seen changes in international cooperation, there are some points that as national government we're trying to strengthen. And it's helped us, not only in this context, but to develop international cooperation. We have diversified modes, resources of assistance to development. It's interesting because we take into account the money that comes in and the structure of our cooperation, where the resources, how to access them. However, the official assistance to development, AOD, is one of the modes of cooperation that moves or where Colombia moves at the international level. Right now, we've been strengthening South-South cooperation for several years. It's a different mode of cooperation where Colombia works hand in hand with other countries from the South, even countries with bigger economic developments such as China and Turkey. Because of political conditions, they are not part of those countries, right? That provide assistance to development, but we have other types of cooperation, focusing on strengthening technical skills or to strengthen processes, not just at the state level, but also at community level. So Colombia is one of the countries that has continued to increase the resources of FOCI. We call it FOCI, it's the Fund for International Assistance, and we can strengthen cooperation modes with other countries in the region. If you've noticed, we have strengthened relations with African countries and Asian countries. The fund allows Colombia to provide assistance to other countries. We've had 1,000, 2,000 million Colombian pesos focused on assistance in other countries, like I said, Brazil, Palestine. We have had resources for emergencies in Haiti and Jamaica, and what we anticipated back then, after talking to different institutions that are part of the cooperation system, is that regional and South relations, I mean, the cooperation is getting better. noticing Canada can say, how do we strengthen our political relations with other countries outside the U.S.? And not to say that that's going to be the case in Colombia, because of course it's not to my agency, but the Chancellor's office and the President's office. It's been a something that we've been working on for decades, and now it gains more relevance. The Pacific Alliance, the integration mechanism with the Caribbean, how hand in hand with those international cooperation processes we can strengthen our political and cultural structures. I believe that it's a need for us, something we have kept for several years, and to strengthen cooperation with the private sector and philanthropy. It's pretty big in some sectors, but it's not always aligned to the agendas that we have at the national level, also at community level. I mean, focusing on development agenda to prioritize the exercise, to raise information, as it was mentioned before, at community level, to see where the needs are.
What are those priorities that need to be seen to? The Chancellor's Office, DNP in Colombia, they have been working together throughout this year. How that plan, that work plan, must be oriented towards other sectors, and hand in hand with them, something's happening at the international level. And this is something that is more than a question, it's a question more than an answer. How are we going to start bringing processes? It's very challenging, or it's very difficult to think about, with resources, not concessional resources, meaning with resources that don't come 100% for execution, but they must have some type of return. Let's say return at the development level, productive goals, what impact the implementation of certain resources bring, what impact they bring. Because of sake of time, I'm gonna go fast with opportunities. The results: cooperation and humanitarian assistance respond. Humanitarian as action, we talk about emergency, immediate, so it's very challenging. How to be able to save lives, how to be able to respond to climate emergencies, conflict, all these variables that we have in our country. There are some questions that have been there for years. One, because of intermediation. How many agencies, entities are intervening before resources come to the implementation processes? How we can see results, and not just, I mean, many cooperating bodies talk about the same type of consultancies, the same type of projects. What is the impact? Where are resources being oriented? Because formulas are repeated. Well, in humanitarian action, we many times need formulas to be repeated because we're talking about emergency assistance actions. However, there are some debates that are talked about for a long time, and they call us at this moment for quick reaction. Hopefully, this year and the following 2 years, we are going to be working on the reorganization as to international cooperation. Thank you very much. In this current context, when there are cuts, what we can see is many opportunities. We have to see if different stakeholders are ready to take the necessary measures, not opportunities for humanitarian action only, but for local leadership. I'm going to talk about three things. One, advocacy. Number two, intermediation role. And number three, capacity strengthening. I want to take on something that Maria Camila mentioned yesterday. Advocacy. There are a lot of speeches there, discourses saying, oh, there is no local capacity to comply projects, to comply with the requirements, to be impartial, and that's totally false. Advocacy must be centralized, saying localization is not just the future, the Congress says it, but it is the present. Localization has worked, works, and will work. We need to reinforce that message and show it with evidence. That is very important. We need to speak with people that we do not agree with. Most of us in this room, we agree. Probably we agree on many topics, but we need to have advocacy on the other side to show what the need is so that humanitarian response is led locally. Second point, intermediary roles. Read, please, a report by ANAP recently on the pilots that are taking place to rethink intermediaries' roles. Right now, in the humanitarian ecosystem, there is a donor, funds come, international intermediary, and then the funds come to a local or national NGO or civil society actors. There is evidence and many pilots that show that there are other ways to have cooperation from local points, local stakeholders, donors directly giving to local agents. Empower model. Many of the partners in this room, they have access to direct funds. Before, they used to be in the hands of international organizations instead of being direct. We need to show that those models do work. An intermediary role does actually, a different one works. Third, capacity strengthening, local leadership. International stakeholders, we need to rethink their role. In English, there is this concept that we call gatekeepers. We keep the information contacts. And for leadership, for local leadership, it is important for international roles change. If we think about the previous panel that we had about strategy, innovative strategies for fundraising, there was this question from the audience: what is the relationship of that and localization? One of the roles international stakeholders can take on is to transfer their knowledge in funds collections. There are many foundations that are not part of international cooperation, many stakeholders that are willing to donate, but then those contacts are on few hands. Are we ready for those changes? We're not speaking about very complex things, but we're talking about intentionality. Different stakeholders to understand that we finally have an outcome strategy or exit strategy. Is not to replace the funds that were lost. Is to think about the funds that are needed for transformation we look for. It's not just to sustain, just to be sustained. And for the first time, and this starts from the before this crisis, but even with cuts more, many stakeholders that have been in this context, there is this exit strategy, not to disappear, but to have a different role, like a supporting role in the shadows or shades, where dollars or euros don't have to go through their accounts to have an impact on communities. So I'll end here. Thank you to the three of you. These answers made us go to the third question. You already answered that question. What is the role of the stakeholders who are involved in this topic? I'd like to summarize very briefly what you mentioned so that we can replicate the good practices that we had or that we've had in the region about the response of Venezuelan migrant population, Alliance for the Pacific. Building from the civil society is less costly to integrate than not to integrate. This is a Latin truth in our countries. South-South cooperation in strategies, philanthropy, communitary strategies are so important for all these processes. Providing humanitarian assistance from all the capacities that we have at the region in the Latin America and the Caribbean. So it's not that we are alone, but we need to go and see everything that we have surrounding us and all the opportunities that we can identify at this moment so that we can have advocacy, validate intermediaries' roles and how we can innovate, and capacity strengthening that should be permanent. This way, we are going to pass the mic to the audience. I know that people are raising hands, and just to make sure we keep track of time, we would like to hear from you, audience. This question is for the colleague from APC. I am the director of a Colombian organization, the HALU organization, Human Wellbeing. Colombian organizations, specifically civil society, local, national organizations, the way we're called, we think that there's still this big distance. There isn't an open channel in Colombian institutions, and in this case, the question for APC, the Presidential Cooperation Agency, cooperation is understood as international cooperation. We are part of this cooperation architecture, this ecosystem. There is capacity development in organizations. There is expertise, the connection with local realities. But we still don't have any mechanisms from the structure of the state so that this capacity is not lost. In this space that we are talking about, the global one, the fund reduction, this is to see it more and how we collect capacity and how we value this and the capacities we had. So I'd like to ask if you've seen this, if there is this mechanism. So civil society, local organization, national organizations, as we know, that we come from cooperation architecture, we have a direct dialogue, and you from institutions can collect this capacity and you have mechanisms to participate. Because in the previous forum, how we overcome these indicators that are they're there in the call in the civil organizations, they don't let us have, we cannot comply with the indicators. The fact that our indicators will always be zero because we obviously are a nonprofit organization. Now that you asked me the question, you touch on different topics in your intervention. The first thing is that when we talk about international cooperation, we mainly talk about, not exclusively, of resources from countries in the world to cooperate at the bilateral level, meaning from other countries to Colombia, and multilaterally, resources that come in certain scenarios and they serve different international agreements. But we need to keep in mind that most resources are those official resources from countries, and they do come in government agreements, those countries that mostly have their own implementation mechanisms. In fact, we as an agency, we do not receive those resources. We do not have 100 capacity to say how they should be implemented. In fact, that's one of our big tasks. Because what you said, well, unfortunately, many institutions or many organizations, many different institutions, Colombian institutions, do not understand what cooperation is for. And we, as APC Colombia, is not only have an explanation as to how it works, but defending, hey, is that what we're going to do with money? Is this what we're going to request from other governments? Let me give you an example. A municipality without a name. A donation was going to come from a country, and we were requesting donations. Donations are not usual for money to build, a public hospital or to buy something specific. So we were going to ask for mouth masks, syringes, and we say, really? Are we going to receive a donation for mouth masks, syringes? We find that here. But that conversation took a long time until there was this machine that we don't have in the country that will strengthen assistance. We think that it may be obvious, but it wasn't. So the thing is that we do not receive resources. We just help with dialogues that national government has through different national territorial institutions so that resources come aligned with priorities. So we have the whole definition how priorities are defined. So we have the National Development Plan, we have the cooperation strategy, and see how the state works. So that's the first thing. Now, about those donors, we come in this government with this clear guideline how to have a greater impact with community organizations in different mechanisms, in different scenarios. Most resources are channeled through organizations that can execute at the territorial level. Let me give you an example. Unfortunately, it's not 100% with the humanitarian sector, but it implements specific actions articulated with humanitarian, that is MPTF, the United Nations Fund for Peace Sustainability. In these past years has achieved 50% of resources were implemented through community organizations and through calls for community organizations. In other periods, it was 20, 30%, and most through UN agencies. So this is a dialogue between the national government and donors with other countries and other stakeholders that have governance and decision about the resources. So USAID that doesn't exist, or GIZ, or they so the negotiation is broad. What exercises? Well, to bring mechanisms to be able to strengthen that capacity to access of resources others that exist. You were talking about US, but the cooperation resources have multiple ones. And we have outreach through Facebook Live of those terms of reference so that organizations can come to those mechanisms. And here I'd like to talk about pilots and exercises so that smaller organizations through grants, through different mechanisms related to implementation can reach those international standards to be able to apply for bigger resources. My time is up, but just to tell you that APC Colombia responds to organizations, citizens, and different stakeholders that want to know about our mechanisms. Well, we should finish, but there will be some space where we can continue discussing. Let's hear it for them. We want to close at 3 p.m. because the agenda cannot be moved. So we come to the last part, the last space. We wanted through the QR, we could build these commitments, the path. What we've talked about in these 2 days, localization, the Latin America and the Caribbean. This workshop opens this dialogue, build collectively and have this roadmap, but also with shared responsibilities. So we will have Janet Rincon from Cáritas Venezuela to lead this last space until 3 p.m. Janet, you're here. What has contributed? Who has contributed? Where are we starting? Where are we going? Thank you. Let's start with collective construction. Our space is called Towards Effective Localization in Latin America and the Caribbean. And the idea is that together we must identify and we need to look at articulating commitments and points to have action routes and overcome the gaps. Can you help me with the... We received 40 contributions and we have this exercise, categorization exercise of those gaps that you have identified. So we would like to take notes because we are going to share on the screen. You'll see your contributions on the screen. Please take note of these 5 ideas. 5 ideas. 5 ideas that summarize your contributions. Those are the gaps or challenges that we must face. Those gaps that we need to close, those challenges that we need to overcome through commitments that we're going to work on in groups. While they get the presentation, let me tell you how we are going to be working now. Let's respond, please. As a group, we're going to answer this question. What specific actions can we implement to overcome gaps and advance in pertinent localization, effective, sustainable? That's the task.
What specific actions can we implement to overcome the gaps and progress towards sustainable and relevant localization? There they are. You can see the commitments. Let's look at the gaps. Take a look at the gaps. We're going to be working in groups. I'm going to explain. These are the specific actions. Let's look at the gaps. I'd like to take note of these 5 categories. The first one that we've heard, rigid financing and little access to many local organizations. First challenge, rigid financing and no access for many local organizations. Access to financial resources, but in addition to bureaucracy, it limits the autonomy, quick response, and operation sustainability. That's the first gap. Second, governance of fund management and information flow is still vertical and let's say exclusive, or it excludes others. There's still dynamic of powers between NGOs and national organizations, and it makes it hard to have clear dialogue. It limits the voices and effective participation in strategic humanitarian decisions. Number 3, lack of connection, disconnection between global systems and local realities. Systems and criteria are imposed from the international bodies, and they do not reflect or adapt to the actual context, specific dynamics of the local organizations, that's impacting their efficiency and relevance. Fourth category of gaps, local capacities are not enough, not sustainable, and high local staff turnover. A scarcity of sustainable mechanisms to support institutional capacities. There are salary gaps and labor conditions that cause high turnover, thus weakening the institutional memory and operational effectiveness. And number 5, visibilization and low effective sustainable participation of local stakeholders in formulation and coordination of the humanitarian response. Local stakeholders face difficulties to keep continuity and be characters in planning, execution, and implementation of their humanitarian response. These are the five categories. Again, rigid financing, governance of funds management. It's still vertical and excluding. Lack of connection between global decisions and local systems. Insufficient capabilities and high staff rollover. And little participation of local stakeholders to manage the humanitarian response. How do we share or approach these commitments? We're gonna work in groups, so we have asked some participants to help us. Group work will be based on two strategies. We're gonna do localization here in the localization congress. That means that we're not going to move from the place where we are, but each one will remain there, and together with the people who are closest to you, 10 people around you, you start a dialogue. They'll be moderated by one of the volunteers. Okay, Lisbeth Mora. Lisbeth? She's on the phone. She's gonna coordinate the work of 10 people there. Pei Cornejo on the fourth line. We have Ricardo Suarez over here, the second line. 10 people to work with him. Camila. Where's Camila? The fourth line there. Camila. There. There are her 10 people. Diana Vega. Where's Diana? Over here. I think that's enough. And Pedro. Pedro and Diana. Over here. Okay, let's try to do this. See if we can. The emphasis of this work is to listen. All right. Janet's got her people. This is the process. Each group will appoint a spokesperson, and they'll share the ideas of the group and upload them onto the QR code, and it tells what group they are from, the moderator in their group. Okay, we need a spokesperson who will gather and then share later. We've got 25 minutes for group work. Moderators will keep record of time. 1 minute to think and reflect on the commitments. Okay, the groups are formed. Those of you following online, please scan the QR code and make your contributions there. Okay, 1 minute to think and reflect in silence. Think about the gaps, and they can think about a concrete action commitment to develop localization. Then we'll give the floor for not more than a minute per person and have a first round. After that, we will have another minute for silence, for silent reflection, and then a second round to hear and speak about, or to speak about what you heard. the commitments that you think are more appropriate. And after the second round, that's what the spokesperson will include and upload with the QR code. Moderators will be accompanying you and helping you should you have questions. After the participation in groups, we'll go back to the plenary session.
Lo tiene Diana. En pantalla tienen las categorías de las brechas y desafíos y la pregunta. Me pasa que yo... Nos quedan 5 minutos para ir concretando. nos indica que el tiempo ha finalizado. Recuerden registrar a través del código.
Remember to upload the information with the QR code. Tell us the name of your moderator and then name the proposals 1, 2, 3, and so on. Because the system won't allow such long contributions. And the spokespeople should be ready to share the results and the conclusions.
Sí. Bueno, llegó la hora de compartir.
Okay, it's time to share. Diana? Okay, let's get ready to conclude our Congress. Those of you who are online, we are going to start with the closing part. Good news is that we have the EU ambassador, Rodríguez, who wants to listen to what's come out of these groups, the roadmap, and these commitments. Okay, so we're going to invite a spokesperson from each table so that they take 1 minute and they can share what they discussed at their table and the contributions and commitments according to the gaps that you wrote about in the morning, and that will be the roadmap today. So you want to call table by table? If they want to speak, you should come up here because we have the live streaming. So we need to speak from here. And we can also see, we're going to ask you to be silent, please. We see that the rooms 1 and 2 are just finishing their work to come here and have the official closure of the Congress. I don't know if there are any volunteers. Okay. We already have someone. Very nice. Let's make some silence. Let's be silent, please. What should we do to make everyone go quiet? Okay. Let's see. First spokesperson. The group. Lisbeth, your group. Lisbeth Mora. Take 1 minute to share. What are the commitments? What are the concrete actions that we are going to carry out to advance in localization? Okay, good afternoon. Hello? Okay. One minute is very little time for the 10 minutes that we have talked in our group because everyone here has a humanitarian sense, but at the local level, I asked my group who received local international cooperation, and everyone raised their hand, all 9. I'm the only local one. We wanted to show participation so that it's not seen as a vertical thing, but plays it horizontally, because we need to understand clearly that local stakeholders decide how they operate as an agency, and many of the problems, or to remove the gaps, yes, we want to do this by identifying the local stakeholders, and they can tell us how we can operate, how we can identify issues, how can we not make mistakes so that we don't lose the resources, and then identify the problem and be able to resolve it. We said we need to strengthen local network and the communities. That could solve a lot of the problems that we, the community, suffer. And I mean a community as people in Cauca, they can participate because we have shown that we are capable and we are leaders, that we can do this process. So this process to be able to remove the vertical axis that we see in the actions, that's something we could do and turn it horizontal. And the local stakeholders should not be seen as competitors, but a way to operate and exercise the community action. So we should be on equal terms. Very little time. Thank you. Thank you, Group 1. Jerry Cornejo, Alexander Torres, your group. And next we'll have Ricardo and Diana's group. They're coming after this group. 1 minute. Hello everyone, I'm Alexander Torres from Cáritas, Switzerland. Well, basically in 1 minute, we discussed 5 big topics, but I'm gonna mention 3. What should we do? First, strengthen local networks after mapping the communities. This thing about financing from a desk, that should be left behind. Number 2, outreach for resource allocation in a tier approach. I mean, the competition there is, for example, donor launches a call, right? 20 million euro. And of course, who has more financial muscle? The big ones. So of course, the donors should map that clearly as to who are the big players, who are the small ones, small NGOs or agencies, so that there's this much for the big ones and there's this much for the small ones, so that there's more balance in the participation of the financing. And number 3, to show in a different manner our own contributions that we can, I mean, there is a lot coming from the organizations, the local ones, and we need to show what we do. And sometimes the donors, they want to show their own economic contribution, but there's a lot that we put in, and it's in kind. To strengthen the organizations. Next group. Diana? Diana, Ricardo? Then we have Shirley's group. 1 minute. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jorge Cárdenas. I come from Monteria. I'm part of the SAHED institution. Our group over there on the right-hand side, we talked about different topics, but I believe that a key point we touched was to work on advocacy, right? And a dialogue agenda to impact localization, to understand localization, to create common governance models, to work with everyone, to be able to do advocacy and outreach in each country. We cannot do outreach here in Colombia the way we do in Africa. It's going to be different. And more specifically, understand localization. We still believe it's important to work on understanding localization and how we actually landed locally and regionally. Administrative topics are very important. Yes, we need to work on this with the local institutions to strengthen those capabilities. Analyze cooperation, our own criteria, to work with consortiums. We think these are key topics, things that we can do, and we started seeing this in Colombia in some experiences. Participate at different humanitarian assistance levels. We believe it's important that local stakeholders be there, present to make decisions. It's important that we be informed of what's being done in the territories. And about advocacy, we need to strengthen dialogue and recognize the capacities at the local level. Shirley's group. You cannot see me behind the podium, sorry. Hello. Well, thank you. We've reflected on several things in our group about the 5 categories of questions. Some of them are cross-cutting. For example, the importance of creating evidence on local capabilities or capacity. We say we're efficient and that we're capable, but there is no proof to show it, to prove our capacities and capabilities. So I think we need to be a stronger protagonist in this architecture, and it's the academia. They should play a bigger role about generating evidence of the situations, indicators as to how situations evolve and local capabilities. A second point has to do with favoring the advocacy spaces and the outreach spaces. For example, local coordination structures, there should be co-leadership and it should be financed. There should be funds for that so that we can participate in the structures. Agree on good practices of the third parties while the translation takes place and this and that. Donors, well, they need to be more flexible and for direct financing. We'll still have the participation of the intermediaries. They could be UN agencies or international NGOs. So we need to agree on good practices so that there be better participation of local organizations in the financing, not just financing, but planning, the response itself. And finally, link or have or actually keep based on the experience at CANAFTA fund, especially in Colombia. Our experience tells us that this has proven results to organize local agencies, something we should keep. And they continue to be the coordinator OSHA, OCHA, and if not them, then there are other structures such as the forum of NGOs, other mechanisms that there could be to do this together, to bring the organizations together, and they could welcome these financing windows, and then they should receive state funds because the state should participate in that fund. I don't know if I left something out. Okay, everyone. And the first one, okay. And the last one to share. Okay, good afternoon. This is Camila's group. We found a first commitment, and it's that the national and local organizations should believe in themselves. That will allow them to certify and show their quality that is even higher than some international organizations.
Another commitment is related to, give me a second, network promotion. In this case, amongst grassroots organizations, community grassroots organizations, and communities to improve financing alternatives. On the other hand, there is the ideal model for national, local humanitarian actors' participation in the interagency coordination spaces. Renewing the commitment with the Manifest for Transformation, and this other one is related with transforming financing models to link Nexus pipelines. And what's related to where national local authorities are. Humanitarian actors, they are there so that we can create better relationships with these stakeholders. That would be all. Thank you so much to all the groups. We will build and we will send it, we will produce the report and send it to you with the memoirs. The ambassador of the European Union is here. Gilles Beltran is here. He heard us. So we can summarize. There are a few groups who have proposed in identifying local actors with each capacities. This is the first step for another proposal that is to work in consortia, networks, collegiate, and well, many things that need to be financed. We spoke about advocacy and dialogue, a proposal for resource allocation, make our own contributions visible. Those that need to believe in themselves, they explore governance models so that they make co-leadership effective. Everything that is related to humanitarian response, coordination, understand localization. So yesterday we saw, okay, what a local organization is to continue strengthening this. Opening for different levels, participation different levels, having this participation model, strengthen the academia to bring evidence to strengthen capacities, agree on good practices for financing and planning, transform financing models so that we can have the triple nexus pipelines, and how we link with the government sector. So we are going to have action lines for together so that we can continue walking in having localization in an effective and sustainable way. Cheers for all of you who built this with us. We have come to the end of today's agenda. Well, we had discussions about climate change, the impact on humanitarian action. We spoke about strategies, sustainability, the financing of all this, and the challenges with the cooperation. We talked about the future of international cooperation, and then we have this collective exercise. Not everything needs to be on paper, but that roadmap needs to help us make decisions in difficult moments. We are going to have a QR for organizers, for everyone. It's very important to know about your opinions, what this Congress, what it was like. So we are always willing to build so that we bring topics to check spaces, workshops. So it's very important for us to get your opinions. You need to start working on this third Congress as of now. I would like to welcome the ambassador in the European Union. And first of all, I would like the organizers to address the public. Lydia from Cáritas, Germany, can you please be here? And I'd like to congratulate you for all the work and for being here. You're welcome to join us in the podium. Good afternoon. It has been a pleasure and a privilege to accompany everyone in these 2 days and to close this second Congress of Localization and Humanitarian Action in Latin America and the Caribbean. First of all, I would like to thank deeply, as the regional coordinator, I would like to thank our Colombian partners and to our allies. They are the strength behind each initiative. Without their leadership and dedication, this space wouldn't have been possible. I saw the commitment and the passion to prepare this Congress. Gratitude, words of gratitude are short to recognize this, the preparation in this event. Each person that had the planning, the magnitude, the success of this is owed to you. Everyone, all participants, thank you for your commitment, active commitment in each reflection space. Thank you for sharing your time and your valuable experiences. I was very impressed by generosity and willingness, the different experiences, learnings. So this also implies showing vulnerability. So once again, we can see personal experiences are so valuable to overcome challenges in localization. We don't only respect personal experiences, sometimes they're painful, but we also include realities, contextualized realities of communities, workers, and those people who are in leadership. We can advance towards humanitarian help that is actually localized. The different sessions in this Congress helped us delve into key topics: the need to build relations, equalitarian relations, and times when local communities are actually leaders for decision making, and the response to crisis, including direct financing models. Leadership by women is inspiring, and communities transform. This shows resilience every day and the capacity to lead their own solutions. The collective commitment to strengthen humanitarian help, a more ethic one, and adapted to contexts and realities that recognizes local voices as indigenous peoples, marginalized people, and they act with responsibility before global challenges as climate change and peace construction or peace building. This localization congress was more than an event. It was a space to get together, reflect, and have collective construction. We didn't only see challenges, but we also saw lessons learned, knowledge, progress in territories. So we saw how communities are not just receivers, but they are the protagonists of their own resilience. We started reflecting, and it was clear that working from local points is not only efficient, but it's ethically key. We were also witnesses of the urgent call to international cooperation. We have multiple emergencies in the region: armed conflict, forced displacement, migratory crisis, natural disasters that require not only immediate attention, but they also need international cooperation. It needs to be sustainable and solidarity. So we need to keep a comprehensive dialogue. Different types of crises need to be visible. They need to have policies that respond to communities, and the humanitarian response must have adequate resources, and we continue strengthening financing mechanisms towards local actors. Today, more than ever, we have sent a clear message. Working locally is not just an option, is the most effective, legitimate way to respond to humanitarian crisis. In this Congress is not just the last point, but this is just a starting point for new alliances, new opportunities, and to continue working together towards humanitarian action that is more participative, localized, and effective. Thank you so much. Just as Lydia summarized these 2 days, she's been here the 2 days. Thank you, Jonas Breder. Welcome to give us words, and thank you for organizing this Congress. Better like this. Good afternoon, everyone. I would like to start by greeting the ambassador of the European Union, Durán. Thank you so much for your presence that we value here at Javeriana University, and to each person present here, and just the people who are joining virtually. I would like to thank everyone who made this event possible. I am thinking about the Europana Together teams, and especially you, local partners, who have organized this event, marvelous event. I thank our donors, especially ECHO, JFO from Germany. Thank you so much for your commitment and your trust. We live in a world in crisis. Humanitarian needs increase every day, while resources unfortunately decrease. But it's not just the world facing challenges. Humanitarian sector is also at this crossing point. Many agencies are forced to step away from regions where need is even more needed than before. In this context, it is more essential than ever to have shared values and common principles, and to be able to support on local professional partners. When there is uncertainty, all of you, local organizations, are the true anchor, the firm rock when there is this storm we have in the humanitarian sector. I'm proud to see that Cáritas has such strong, solid partners, and in other countries represented in our Congress. Partners with whom we have built equalitarian relationships based on respect, trust, and shared vision. This demonstrates a key truth. Localization is not only important, it is indispensable. Probably our presence as an international organization has limited time. It is most likely, but you, local partners, are always present. You're rooted in communities. With this Congress from Latin America, we would like to send a clear message to the world. It is possible, and it's not only possible, but more relevant and more transforming to have humanitarian action based on trust. We are aware that there are challenges. We know the path is not easy, but there cannot be other objective than transforming and strengthening humanitarian action through true local leadership. Local leadership is not us as humanitarian agencies, but I am talking about humanitarian aid thought from the perspective of those affected, impacted, from the perspective of those communities, those who actually need our help. Throughout these days, we have been able to share valuable reflections. We've heard inspiring speeches, and we participated in marvelous panels. I am taking many learnings with me. One of them is that changes in the system may be slow, but they are needed. And they can only be achieved step by step, walking together. With this hopeful message, I would like to close wishing that this Congress was a step in this path together. Thank you again. Have a wonderful afternoon and safe travels to those that have come from far away. Thank you for those warm words. And from the organizers, local partners, before the ambassador closes, I'd like to ask Andrés Moscalve from Salto Ángel and Indy Gubeira from Cáritas Brazil so that we can close the event. Dear attendees, before starting by greeting and protocol, I'd like to share a small personal story. I come from a small city in the border, just a place where people just go through and is invisible. I have lived in my own life migration, abandonment from the state, but also the strength of communities. A few years ago, a group of people who also we dreamed with other types of cooperation, we started asking ourselves, what would happen if humanitarian action would not be decided from the top, but from territories? What would happen if we didn't have to explain with numbers so that others understand what we can count on, what we can tell with our own words? Then, in 2022, from Together, we started weaving what this Congress is today in this third edition. That was not a dream that was born in big offices. No, it was the conviction that local organizations are not there to execute foreign plans, but to lead, to decide, to transform. Being here today with so many people who also believe in that is absolutely exciting. Thank you to the ambassador of the European Union for being here with us, for listening to us. Thank you to the Humanitarian Office of the Federal Government of Germany and the German Embassy. They were here yesterday because that shows that there is acknowledgement that localization is not just a technical approach, it is a political ethic act. Well, thank you all. The 14 local organizations and to Javeriana University that went for this event and make it possible. Those who joined virtually in the transmission, live transmission that we have right now, and those who continue believing in localization. To the youth, you've seen them supporting in the logistics and protocol. They're training. They're being trained to lead processes without asking for permission. To women, to community leaders that every day teach us something new. In spite of the fact that local organizations are the ones that keep the humanitarian response every day, less than 2% of international financing gets directly to our hands. That doesn't speak about of a structural challenge, but urgency. Redistribute power in knowing that without local organization, humanitarian action does not happen. The most important thing is that our voices are being heard, not just as guests, but as hosts of a conversation that belongs to us. We close this Localization Congress 2025 knowing that this does not end here because localization is not an event, it is a movement. And yes, there's still things left. Willingness, coherence, redistribution, real redistribution of power. But it's not the same ones, those who started. We're speaking with a lot of strength. We're speaking with more challenges. Thank you for being part of this moment. Thank you for believing, just as we do, that we can build from the riverbanks. Those of us who dream in cooperation, human and fair, now that's why we are here together. I'll see you soon there in territories because that's where everything happens. Thank you.
Hola, buenas tardes.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to start by thanking the organizers, the Together members, the Europana Consortium, those who have led bravely all this debate on localization in our region, our partners that financed these initiatives, and also the team that took care of logistics and everything. And they welcomed us these 2 days. It was important to share these 2 days with you. I'd like to thank the communities, those who have been present here. We can discuss and to know more about localization. I come from Cáritas Brazil. It's the one we call it in Brazil, we work with the communities in the field, the community, how or other local organizations that are present in their countries, they operate in the territory throughout the region. It's important for us to participate in this event that it's very significant. Bringing local organizations together, cooperation institutions, and so many voices, diverse voices, reaffirms that localization is not just a concept, but it's the right path to value the knowledge and the local protagonism. I'm inspired to see so many cutting topics that were discussed: direct financing, protection, sustainability, gender, the environment, emergencies, community participation, and several others. This shows that localization is the path we must follow by listening and through continuous commitment. We have completed this Congress with a lot of commitments, but we are certain that we are not alone. And we have a lot to do in the future. As local organizations, we invite governments, cooperation, international organizations. We invite them to talk to us. We want to build a fair world and an equal world for everyone. Let's continue building together and strengthening partnerships, because localization means that it's a true response that starts and stays in the communities. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you, to be together. Thank you.
Muchas gracias por esas palabras. Y ahora
Thank you very much. And now we are going to close, and we welcome the European Union Ambassador to Colombia to close this Congress with these words. And thank you for the support from the EU in humanitarian assistance. Let's give him a round of applause. I see that they are fighting over the mic. Everyone who's been here, they're having a hard time with the microphone to adjust the height. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. It's an honor to me to address you to close this Congress on localization and humanitarian action. It's a key space that has allowed us the exchange of ideas, experience, and knowledge amongst donors, intermediaries, and stakeholders, local stakeholders. Meetings such as this one represent a concrete expression of the grand bargain spirit by encouraging the dialogue, strengthening coordination, and advancing towards a more efficient humanitarian response. It'll be more inclusive and focused on those who need it the most. And we are pleased to have supported this event through the ECHO office here. We have the office and Cedric Ferrus, my colleague, and to have done this hand in hand with the German embassy through the Together project. To have done this with Cáritas, and of course, 1,000 thanks to Javeriana University for having welcomed us generously here in their facilities in Bogota. Localization is a key pillar in humanitarian action. And we are witnesses, my colleagues, our friends from ECHO throughout the region, our colleagues from other embassies of the EU, me here in Colombia, in all my trips and the missions that we take in the country, we are witness of the big work that you, the organizations, local organizations, do with your experience, your professionalism, your commitment to territories where you are constantly present and show humanitarian action. We are committed to strengthening the role of the local stakeholders and the CSO, because you are the ones who are there in the first line of the response in case of emergency, and as a result contribute significantly to mitigating the impact of the crisis. And about this, the EU keeps active interest to empower those key stakeholders to the extent that we recognize their deep knowledge of the context, their closeness to the communities, and their capacity to create long-lasting change. And speaking of Colombia, which is the country I know the most, I think we can be proud of what has become a Colombian model for localization and something that you can share with other countries in the world. Now, localization to us is an opportunity for very many things, but especially three of them. First is an opportunity to support the implementation of actions with a more sustainable approach. We believe that we can work with the local civil organizations so that they integrate and promote respect for the environment, responsible management of resources, strengthening local capacities. And here in Colombia and the region, we are already supporting projects that look into that. They combine humanitarian action with a sustainable and innovative approach to guarantee a more profound impact and something that lasts longer. Second, we keep a firm commitment to promote and protect human rights. Now here, this principle is present in the localization strategy that we have supported and the approach that a humanitarian response is not just to save lives. Of course, that's essential, but it means to defend dignity, protect the most vulnerable ones, and also promote inclusive societies. A third point we recognize is the value of innovation and technology as drivers of local development. Social innovation, a key tool to transform challenges into opportunities. In Colombia, our support will continue to drive technological solutions that will respond to the specific needs of communities. We cannot forget the urgency to show and to find the humanitarian crisis that many countries in America are facing. We believe it's key that these crises that are less visible than other crises in the world, they may find the attention and the focus of the international agenda. I'd like to tell you here that you can count on the commitment of the EU to that cause, and that we want to reaffirm our commitment so that the voices of impacted communities may be heard in the global forum for and before many donors. In more general terms, I want to use this time to talk to you to reaffirm our commitment to finance local projects in Colombia that may respond to the humanitarian emergencies. This support from our side, from ECHO, it's not just words, but it translates into concrete actions and direct investments and the strengthening of the local capacities that may serve to provide more effective and adapted responses according to the context. At the same time, I know you've talked about this throughout these 2 days. We must recognize that there is a deep crisis that is impacting the humanitarian sector, especially financing. The financial cuts are also a call, red flag for us donors, but of course to the CSO in general in the region. So there are two key messages. First, we have to pass on the common message to the governments, the states, so that they may take on their responsibility, especially in many of the coordination areas, many of the organization activities to provide the humanitarian response that they've been financed by donors. But in many cases, we believe that we need for the states, governments to, put it on their shoulders, and so to speak. And second, a message to you, more a call to diversify your sources of financing, to identify strategies to reduce your dependence on international financing. And we know that it's not easy, but we also know that there are many opportunities in the region. For example, the private sector is dynamic, much more dynamic than many more countries where we work in the middle of crisis, and also very many people who are willing to support the transforming work carried out by the civil society. Along that same line, we believe that the government local authorities should invest more in their own society, the civil society, and make sure that the local organizations provide humanitarian assistance neutrally and impartially. Finally, to conclude, I wish to invite you to continue to create spaces such as this Congress. I think we need more platforms that gather all the stakeholders to promote mutual learning and to inspire new forms of cooperation. This is the only way for us to build a more resilient future with solidarity and sustainability for everyone, and it's the best way to continue to build the Colombian model and the Latin American model and the Caribbean model of localization. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias, embajador.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for those kind words. They well summarize these 2 days of work and contribution to our roadmap. We've finally come to the closure of our second Congress on Humanitarian Action Localization LATAM 2025. And okay, we have a big surprise. That's why we invite you to another building, Gerardo Arango Puertas, where there'll be some final closing ceremony. Symphony for Change with Cooperation Notes. Very profound title. Symphony for Change with Cooperation Notes. Ricardo will be leading us there. Some transformations are not shouted, they are shared. So we invited to connect so that we recognize behind each cooperation effort there is a shared rhythm, there is a common language, there's an collective intention to harmonize change. That's why here music turns into a bridge and conversation turns into the lines. So we are awaiting an experience that mixes art with purpose, where the notes and the links are interweaving, and we continue to compose a fairer and more sustainable future. Thank you very much for having been here throughout these 2 days. Thank you very much for your contributions. Thank you very much for your work. The code, okay, it's a very important survey for the organizers with your comments, contributions, and everything. All our audiences yesterday said that over 300 people had joined in the platform. Europe, Africa, following our Congress in Latin America. So thank you very much for joining. Those who remain here, we have the memoirs of the Congress. If you'd like to watch one of the workshops that you may have been interested, all the memoirs are in the official website of our Congress. Because localization, it's not just a strategy, it's a way to watch, listen, and act. Thank you very much. And let's go to the last concert. Let's follow.